So, hello everyone, and welcome to Inside the Application Literally. My name is Laurel Grodman. I'm Assistant Dean for Admissions at the Yale School of Management, also a proud member of the Yale SOM class of 2006. And as the title of this event implies, I'm going to literally open up our application, share my screen, and provide a walkthrough of the application live. This is actually one of my very favorite events to do, particularly this time of year, because our team just worked really hard going through our application, getting it ready for launch, which we did earlier in the month, and really thinking so intentionally about each aspect of it. So it's an opportunity for us to get a chance to tell you a little bit about how we're thinking about the application experience. Unfortunately, the one part of this event that I don't like as much is it is not sort of a two-way dialogue. We have many, many other events coming up in the coming weeks where there's an opportunity to take your questions and hear a little bit more specifically about what's on your mind. But for the sake of getting as much information into today's events as we can, today will not be a Q&A event. Hopefully, if we have time at the end, I'm also going to go through a few parts of the process that aren't literally in the application, but happen after you hit submit, namely our video questions, our behavioral assessment, and our interview process. So in a moment, as promised, I will open up the application itself. But first, I did want to share a few words about the philosophy behind our approach to the application and how we evaluate candidates, which I hope is going to frame our walkthrough that we're about to do in some useful ways. So to get started, I know that sitting down to complete a business school application, much like this this event here, can feel like a one-way monologue where you're telling us about yourselves and what you bring to the table, but I really encourage you to think about it more like a dialogue. The application itself is our part of the dialogue. It's the admissions committee sharing with you what is important to us and what we're hoping to learn about you. At SOM, we are very thoughtful about our role in the conversation. As I said, we spent a lot of time as a committee every summer identifying what matters most to us in assessing candidates, and in turn, what information we need to solicit in our application and gather from you in order to make those assessments. And we put a lot of thought into the application and specifically how we collect that information from you. So the questions and the prompts that we're going to walk through and that you'll see in our application are part of the dialogue. We try to be good communicators in that. One of our guiding principles is to only ask questions that are relevant to your candidacy. So hopefully your experience of going through our application will be that feels a little bit more intentional and streamlined as a result without a whole lot of extraneous stuff. With that, I'll note that the admissions committee will see the vast majority of the information that you share in the application in our reading review process, but not necessarily everything and not necessarily all at once. So I'll try to point out a few areas where that might be, but there are some areas where we're collecting things only for statistical or reporting purposes that we might not see as part of an application read. And in other instances, we're collecting things that we may not see at the very start of our process, but will come in later on. So I'll try to point that out as we go. And then as for your role, as with any conversation, it's important for you to be both a good listener and a good communicator. So today I'm hoping to help you with the listening part by giving you a sense of not just what we're asking, but why we're asking it and what sorts of information we're hoping to get from you. And in turn, I hope that will position you well for your part of the conversation, which is sharing the relevant information about yourself and helping us connect the dots. So at the highest level, everything that we're looking for can really be boiled down to three main areas: your academic readiness for a rigorous MBA program, your evidence of professional potential and impact, and how you contribute to the communities that you're a part of. Really, everything that we're asking gives us information about one or more of those three areas, and I'll try to point that out as we go through the application. And the last thing I'll say before we open things up is we also believe strongly in bringing in a diverse group of students across a variety of backgrounds and geographies and interests and experience. We really think that that's essential to creating the community that lives our mission of educating leaders for business and society. And we believe that students from a really wide range of backgrounds and circumstances can thrive at SOM in our community. And to this end, we've built in elements of the application to look at who you are, where you're coming from so we can understand the context of your individual story, your trajectory, and how that lays the foundation for each of those three main aspects of your candidacy that we're seeking to understand, which I just shared. So, with that, if you'll give me just a moment to share my screen, we are going to go inside the application literally. Great. So hopefully everyone is able to see the homepage of our application, and we can get started with everyone's favorite part, the instructions. It actually is one of my favorite parts because it's something that we as an admissions team think deeply about every year. We think about where did applicants from the previous cycle get tripped up or maybe not quite understand what we were trying to get across. And so we do spend a lot of time thinking about how we articulate what we're asking for. And so, while I'm not going to literally walk you through every line of the instructions now, I actually do encourage you when you're ready to sit down and review the application, spend some time with the instructions, read them carefully. They really are quite intentional. And while I'm thrilled you're attending this event today and hopefully some others, you really have everything that you need to complete our application right here in the app with the questions itself. I'll note as well, and maybe we can share a link in the chat. We also have an application guide, which is a nice supplement to it. Again, not necessary, but to give you a little bit of additional insight into how we're approaching the application. It's a good time to mention, too, we have a few different ways of applying to Yale SOM. Certainly, you can apply directly through our application process. You can also apply through the consortium, as well as QuestBridge. And what I'll note about all of those other venues for applying is everything is exactly the same. The information we're collecting is exactly the same. You may just navigate it a slightly different way. So if you're applying through the consortium, you'll enter sort of more centralized biographical information through the consortium forum, and then through the supplement, you'll get an opportunity to answer all the questions that you'll see here today. So again, same application elements, just a different vehicle through which you will apply. I will note, importantly, our application deadline. So our first round of applications is the deadline is September 15th. You'll note that for each of these rounds of application, you'll see a post-submission materials deadline. That's an important date to keep in mind. It's typically about 2 days after the application deadline, and that is when you'll need to complete all of the parts of the application that are not due when you hit submit. So those would be our video questions, our behavioral assessment, getting us official test scores, things like that. So keep in mind those dates as well. Sliding up here just a moment, I'll note application fees. So we do have a number of fee waiver categories based on participation in a number of different programs, also to students and alumni of almost 700 universities that have significant initiatives to promote economic diversity as well. So you can check that out. And then generally speaking, we have a sliding scale application fee where there are 3 different tiers of application fees based on the income you're reporting in order to make our application process a little bit more accessible. So wanted to point that out. The other important thing I'll point out on our general instructions page here is our statement on AI. We get a lot of questions, not surprisingly, about what is and isn't okay when it goes to using AI within the application process. And I would treat this statement really not so much as rules, but guidance. We're looking for you to use good, sound judgment here. And the best guidance that I can give and that we share here is use AI in the same way that you would use a trusted friend or colleague. So you wouldn't ask a friend or colleague to wholesale generate application materials for you or have an extremely heavy hand in developing those materials, but you might solicit their help for guidance or for input or for fine tuning on language. Those are the ways that you should be thinking about using AI if you choose to use it. within the written components of your application process. And we'll talk about this a little bit more when we get into video questions and interviews, but I would say when it comes to the spoken components of your application, I would steer clear entirely of AI. And we can talk a little bit more about that later, but you really are not doing yourselves any favors by generating any sort of content that is not your own on the spot in those venues. So again, we'll talk about that a little bit more. But I think that's going to be it for the basic instructions page. We're going to skip over the statement of honesty, not because it's not important, but because it is fairly straightforward, and start moving into the core of the application. So we are starting here with a lot of sort of personal, biographical, demographic information, fairly straightforward. But this is how we start to collect information about who you are, where you're coming from. A couple of things that I'll point out specifically here as I scroll down. Again, most of this is fairly straightforward demographic information. Couple of things over here that I'll point out. If you are a reapplicant to the Yale School of Management, you'll identify that here. You will have one additional requirement, which is to share a reapplicant essay, which is really just a short statement on what has changed since your last application. You will have some options for porting things over from your previous application. You can choose to or not. That would include your letters of recommendation. You're welcome to use the same ones or new ones. You are welcome to use the same essay, for instance, if you choose. You're not required to. Entirely a personal choice, but I thought I would just call that out here. This is actually a fairly boring but important update that we've added here. Sometimes we have a really hard time matching you to your test scores, so we do ask you if you have used a different email address to register for any of your standardized tests. This is a great opportunity to share that with us and make that fairly seamless. I'll give you an example of something that we actually do not see during the bulk of our application process. I mentioned there aren't too many of them, but we do ask for a LinkedIn profile. Not mandatory, it's optional. This is something that by and large we're not going to use when we're assessing your application. We're going to rely on how you've represented your employment experience in the application, but we use it as a sort of a backup resource if we need to corroborate something or get a little bit more information. So again, an example of something we ask for, but it's not necessarily going to be at the forefront of the application review. All right, the last thing I'll share on here is I want to point out that we do offer a fairly wide range of joint degree programs with other schools within the Yale University ecosystem. You have an opportunity to learn more about those. What I do want to point out is that if you are interested in applying to a joint degree program, you must apply separately to each of the schools that you're applying to. There is no combined application process. So if you're interested in applying to us and the School of the Environment, you'll complete two separate applications. It will be two completely separate application review processes and decisions. And so be sure that you are well aware of the deadlines and the processes for each of the schools that you're interested in applying to. All right. So from here, we're going to move on to academics and test scores. And as I mentioned at the top, I'll try to link these to the three core areas that we're trying to assess in each candidate. And maybe not surprisingly, both the academic record and the test scores work in tandem to give us a sense of your academic readiness for the MBA program. So first, we'll go to the academic record. Okay, and so this is one area that I would really encourage you to spend some quality time with the instructions because errors or omissions in this area are the number one reason that a application gets held up once we've started to review it. And you don't want that to happen. You don't want any kind of delay to the opportunity for your application to move through the funnel. So this is where you're going to want to spend some time looking really closely at how we're asking you to present your information, particularly if you have situations like you attended multiple schools, maybe through a transfer or a study abroad experience. There are really specific instructions for how to share that information with us. It's not difficult, but it just requires a little bit of closer attention. So you'll want to make sure that you have transcripts that show grades and course names for every single institution where you have enrolled for university level credit. So again, study abroad, transfer, one-off courses that you may have taken during a given summer. We'll want transcripts for all of that with full information there. You'll see, I'm going to scroll down here when you actually enter each academic experience here. Again, fairly straightforward information that you'll share. One thing that I'll ask as a big favor to our admissions team is most of you who are submitting a transcript will have some kind of transcript key as part of it, and that's great. And you'll upload a copy of that as well. If for some reason your transcript doesn't have that, please link to where we can find your university's transcript key on your university's website. It's often in the registrar's area of the website. So that's a big, big help to us. All right. Scrolling down here, but so, we're gaining information about your academic history, your academic trajectory. We're not just looking at a GPA at the end of the day. We're looking to understand, did you challenge yourself? Did you improve your coursework or your performance in your coursework over time? So you are more than just your GPA. You truly are all of the work and effort and experiences that went into building your academic background, and we're looking to understand that. We do ask some specific questions about your quantitative background, and it's important to explain here that we don't require a particular quantitative background for an MBA program. It's certainly helpful. You'll take quantitative coursework if you've had some exposure there. It's to your benefit, but it's absolutely not a requirement. We'll ask a few questions here about specific experience in a few different course areas that you'll see. And we're doing this in large part to understand what your starting point is. One of the things that we do with this information is assess whether you'll receive, if you're admitted to school and choose to enroll, whether you'll receive an invitation to math camp, which is an opportunity to get some baseline exposure to some quantitative principles and tools before heading into the MBA program. So giving us a clear snapshot of the exposure you've had is definitely important. One thing I'll call out that's important over here as well is we ask you where you are in your academic journey. So many of you will have graduated a number of years ago and already be employed, but some of you may still currently be in an undergraduate experience or maybe a master's degree that's happening right after undergrad. You'll want to answer this question here about your current academic status as one of the first things you do, because it will inform some of the later information that we collect about your work experience. We have a program called Silver Scholars that is designed specifically for people who are coming directly out of an academic experience, again, either as in the final year of your undergraduate studies or a one-year master's that immediately comes after it. It's a really unique program that allows you to begin your MBA immediately, spend some time in between your two academic years gaining professional experience, and then returning for your final year of the MBA program. So you can learn more about that program, but you'll want to make sure that you identify yourself correctly in this question so that you'll receive the appropriate version of your employment experience questions to come. And then lastly, this is an area that doesn't tend to get a lot of airtime in application overviews, but I'll point it out. We do ask a few questions about experiences with disciplinary review, whether in an academic setting or in a legal setting, or if you've had a test score canceled. I call this out because I think if you do fall into one of these categories, it can be sort of scary with what questioning what we do with this information. And this is a really good example of something that, as I mentioned, we don't see everything in the application up front. We reserve your answers to these questions to the end of our application review process. We know that having had a disciplinary event in your history can likely be a very sort of involved experience. We don't want to adversely kind of impact an application read with one data point of information. So we actually have a separate committee of some admissions members of our academic affairs and student life council who deal with academic disciplinary issues at our school to help us put these questions in context. So it's not something that is visible in an application review up front, but that can involve a lot more kind of thoughtful, consistent review at the end of the process. So I thought I'd point that out. And then moving on to test scores, as I mentioned, this is sort of the complementary aspect of understanding your academic background. We don't look sort of solely at test scores alone and have a cutoff and say, okay, the test score is simply too low. We're not going to bother to review your academic record. We're really looking at all this information in tandem. They work side by side. Um, and we don't even consider every aspect of testing the same for every candidate. As a concrete example, if you have an extremely quantitative academic record and background, we don't need to rely quite as heavily on your quantitative score on a standardized test, as just one example of how even the weighting of a given kind of test might not be the same across all of our candidates. But a few things that I'll point out here, just on a more technical kind of basis, is you will self-report all of your scores in the application itself. And when I say all of your scores, I truly do mean all of them, not just your highest. We want to understand, the entire breadth of tests that you've taken. We will, of course, credit your best showing, but we want to understand, you perhaps may have had a higher subscore on an individual test, and it's useful to be able to see that. We want to understand whether you've taken the test multiple times and maybe seen improvement. We offer waitlist feedback. If you find yourself on our waitlist, it's helpful for us to understand if you've taken the test many, many times already. We're not going to go back and say, hey, why don't you go take it again when we know you've worked at it. So please do include all of your scores here. Something that's and I should point out, self-reported here, but we will require your official verified scores from the testing agency by that post-submission materials deadline. So the sooner you can get that in, the better. The new thing that I'll point out this year, if you're a GMAT test taker, you may have heard that GMAT is introducing super scores. It is new to us as well, but what I'll say is in the application itself, please only report individual test settings. Don't report super scores. We will receive your super score if you're eligible to receive one directly from GMAT, from the testing agency. So you won't need to provide that. We will see all of your scores. We will take all of your scores into consideration. I actually think it's not all that different from how we've approached scores historically, which is, as I mentioned, we want to see all of your scores because we want to understand if maybe you had stronger performance in one area versus another, but we're also interested in your performance in a single test setting. So again, we'll get your super scores if you're eligible to receive them from the testing agency. We'll consider all of your scores in tandem, including individual settings and super score. And if you have any questions about whether you're eligible to receive a super score, given your own testing history, those are best fielded by GMAT directly, not the individual schools. So I'll point that out as well. One question that we get pretty commonly about testing is, can I continue to send you tests after the deadline? I will say, certainly do your best to be ready to submit your test scores at the point where you're applying in the round where you're applying. That's an important component of your application, and it is something that we will see when we begin to review your application. We will always do our best to review additional information that you've sent in after the deadline. So if you take a test sometime after you've submitted your application, you're absolutely welcome to send us that update through your application portal. We'll do our very best to look at it, but we can't make any guarantees based on where you are within the review process thereafter. So I really encourage you to plan your testing out so that it will be as available as possible before the deadline. And then in terms of what the scores are that we're looking for themselves, I think the best starting point is we have a class profile page where we don't only share sort of a midpoint score, median, but also an 80% range. That's going to give you a really good sense of, again, a range of where the class is. And I'll encourage you to remember that is the enrolled class. It's not representative of everyone that we admitted. It's the people who have chosen to come, which aren't always one and the same. But what I'd encourage you to think about is, we do admit people above and below that range. If you find yourself, let's say, below the 80 percentile range, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't apply or that you don't have a chance of being admitted, but you'll want to think about what aspects of your application are kind of counterpoints to that. So is your academic history particularly strong? Have you taken additional coursework to shore up your academic preparedness? Has your on-the-job learning been particularly extraordinary? So again, it's always going to be a check and balance, but I think that's a good starting point to be thinking about score ranges. All right. Going to move away from academic preparation a little bit and into the professional potential, professional impact area. And the two places, well, really three places where we're going to get the most information about that are the work experience section, the post-MBA interests, and the letters of recommendation. So I'll spend a little bit of time on both of those, or all three of those. What I will say is the work experience and the recommendation are more kind of backwards looking at what you have done. The post-MBA interests are more forwards looking at what you intend to do. So that might be a helpful way of framing this. But the starting with the work experience. So again, you'll want to make sure you've correctly identified yourself if you are a current undergraduate student, so you get the right version of this. But right now we're looking at the general version of this page. Um, and a couple of things that I'll point out here is we'll basically ask you to present your information in two ways. One, you'll share with us a resume. So I'm sure many of you have prepared resumes in the past for various reasons. If you haven't, we offer up what is ultimately the template that you will use if you were a student at Yale SOM, just as an option within here, but it's not a requirement that you use it. It's just if you're looking for a starting point. So we will get a resume from you as well as individual employment entries. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time on the employment entries only because they're a little bit unique. And it's an area that if you're saving your application till the night before, you might be surprised to see that there's a little bit more meat in here than you were expecting. And it's actually really, really important stuff and a great opportunity for you to be able to tell your work story to us a little bit better. So open up an example here. So there are a lot of fairly self-explanatory information about your time at a particular organization. What I'm going to scroll down to is this area at the bottom here. So it's three brief statements, very brief, 20 to 50 words, depending on the area. But it's an opportunity for you to share a little bit about the organization that you work for, summarize your role, and then importantly, talk about your reason for leaving if it's a role that you're not currently in. And what I'll say is these first two aspects, I think, serve as a really nice equalizing factor for, as you can imagine, we see lots of people who come from companies or regions or organizations that we're just simply not as familiar with as some of the others that we receive. So it's an opportunity to give a really quick overview and help ground the application reader and the experience that they'll be looking at and what specifically you've been doing in that role. So those are those first two boxes. The reason for leaving, I actually really like this as an opportunity to do something that a resume doesn't do. So a resume doesn't give anyone information about why you made the choices to transition between the roles that you have or transition between the organizations that you have. And oftentimes there's really interesting or compelling stories there. This is an opportunity for you to summarize that story. So I'm not going to go through my test example here, but this is an opportunity to say something a little bit more than got a new job or found a new opportunity. That's self-evident already from your application. But if you talk about sort of the intentionality behind that transition, and sometimes it's a very practical reason, like you needed to relocate. Sometimes it has more to do with your career aspirations and your path. So again, this is a great opportunity to talk to us and give us a little bit of the glue between the reasons, glue of the between the opportunities that you've shared with us on your resume and why you've made the transitions you have. I'll point out here as well, if you are an entrepreneur, you founded your own company, you get a whole separate area to talk to us about it. And again, I think this is a great opportunity because sometimes a resume doesn't do justice to the work that you've done on an entrepreneurial venture. We worked over a series of many years with our Dean of Entrepreneurship, Kyle Jensen, to develop questions that really get to the heart of an entrepreneurial experience and allow you to showcase the great work that you've done, regardless of what the outcome of your venture was. And so again, you'll have an opportunity to give us a little bit more detail here so that we can fully appreciate your entrepreneurial experience. A couple other things I'll point out here, gaps in work experience. There's nothing inherently wrong or problematic about having a pause in your work experience or currently being unemployed, but it's something, once again, that's hard to explain or hard to represent in its full depth on a resume. So this is where we give you an opportunity, in fact, ask if you've had any unemployment gaps of 3 months or more, or if you're currently unemployed, to give us a brief statement on that helps provide some context and explanation here. Okay, I'm going to jump to recommendations just because, like I said, I think this ties in closely to the kind of backwards looking aspect of your professional experience. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time today talking about who the best people are to go to for letters of recommendation or that kind of thing, only because I know that that type of advice is available through many other resources that we provide. What I will say is if you are not a Silver Scholars candidate, we're asking for two professional letters of recommendation. If you're a Silver Scholar, it's going to be one academic and one professional. The thing that I will call out here is that on the work experience page, we'll ask you specifically to indicate if you don't have a current supervisor as one of your recommenders. I will say the gold standard is to have a current supervisor. Why? Because it hits upon both being a recent kind of look into your employment experience. The recency is valuable for us to understand how you're operating in today's context. And the supervisor piece of it is really important because it's somebody who's entrusted with your development and your feedback and sees you most closely. So those are the things we value the most. So again, gold standard if you're able to get a current supervisor, but we also recognize that there are a variety of reasons why that might not be possible given your individual circumstances. That's totally fine. What we ask on the work experience page is that you identify if that's your situation over here. Say, no, I don't have it. If no, please explain. So it might just be my current supervisor doesn't know I'm applying to business school. That's perfectly fine. Again, just giving us that information so we don't have to guess. All right. So from there, I want to look at the kind of forward-looking piece of your professional impact, and that's your post-MBA career interests. So the first thing I will say here is we know people change their mind. Nothing that you say in this section are you going to be held to once you matriculate at Yale SOM. We're not going to check your job on the way out and say, this is not what you said that you were going to do. But what we do know is that people who have given deep intentional thought to why they're pursuing this degree and what they're hoping to get out of are the ones who tend to be most well prepared for the job search activities that will take place once you're an MBA. So this is your opportunity to show us that you've been doing your homework here. We're not judging your interests. We're not judging what you say that you want to do, but we are judging whether or evaluating whether you have given the time and attention to this exercise that we know it deserves. So I'll read the prompt here that you'll answer. I wouldn't call it an essay. Some nonsense words in there. Wouldn't call it an essay. It's a 200-word statement, which is roughly the length of these two paragraphs over here, so quite brief, but hopefully accomplishable in this space. We ask you to briefly describe your career interests and how you arrived at them. What have you already done to explore or pursue these interests? What have those efforts helped you understand about the opportunities you are considering and the preparation they will require? So let me break this down for you, and I think there's some good advice in the why we're asking section of this particular page as well. A good answer will tell us that you have a distinct area of interest that's prompted your MBA exploration. If that interest is directly related to the work that you've already done or that you've been doing, you're going to draw those connections for us and explain how you're looking to get from point A to point B. If it's a pivot or more major departure from where you are today, you'll demonstrate to us that you've done the research to understand what it will take to get from point A to point B. And again, we're not looking to judge what you're interested in. We're not playing career counselor to assess the feasibility of whether it's a good choice or we like the choice. We're really looking to understand that you've done the homework and the self-reflection necessary to create a firm foundation to your career search and really hit the ground running once you begin an MBA program. So I hope that that's a useful kind of piece of advice here. I will say in the scheme of things, we're placing more weight on the actions that you've already taken, the career history that you're bringing to the application and the years that you've potentially put into that, than a 200-word statement on what you're looking to go do going forward. But it is important, like I said, to have a clear reason and some clear introspection on what comes next. All right, I'm going to pop along here. I'm probably running behind on time, but I get so excited about talking about some of these sections. From here on out, we're moving a little bit more into perhaps the kind of community-based engagement and how you show up as a community member aspect of your application. We will ask you to list some of your activities that you've been engaged in. We actually limit it to 2 undergraduate activities and 2 post-undergraduate activities to highlight, not because you might not have been engaged in more than that, but we want to really understand where you've devoted the most of your time and efforts to and the things that you're most proud to reference here. I would encourage you to think broadly about activities. These can be things you might think of traditionally, like volunteer engagements or sports or extracurriculars. It can also be significant commitments to family that you might be engaged in, or again, other areas where you've devoted a significant amount of time outside of your studies and your professional work. So this is an opportunity to share that with us. Moving into the essay, I do want to give a little bit of time to the essay because it tends to be an area that people have a lot of questions about. It might be an opportunity to tell us a little bit more about how you engage as a community member, but again, it's very dependent on what you choose to talk to us about here. So it could potentially inform any aspect of the key things we're looking for in an application. The key things I'll point out here are you will complete 1 essay for us, just one. We give you a choice of 3 prompts. You're welcome to choose any one of them. And what I'll say is all of the prompts are really, in a sense, getting at the same thing for us. We are looking for you to describe something that is really meaningful to you, really matters to you, and we invite you to do that through the lens of your biggest commitment to the community that's been most meaningful to you or the most significant challenge you have faced. We find that candidates choose from all 3 of these prompts relatively evenly. There's no prompt that makes for a better essay than the other. It's really what speaks to you the most. And what I would encourage you to do here is really, again, think about what is most meaningful to you, what matters most to you, what have you dedicated the most of your time and talents to. These are the sorts of questions that probably are going to generate 2 or 3 things right off the bat for you. And I'd encourage you, think about the one that you feel most comfortable writing about, or that you feel you'll have the most kind of fruitful thing to say. There's no right or wrong answer to what you're picking here. And while obviously we'll give some consideration to the topic that you've chosen to write about, what we're actually far more interested in are your behaviors. You might be getting a sense through our conversation today. We're really interested in understanding kind of what sorts of actions have you put behind the commitments that you've made to your academics, to your professional life. This is another opportunity for you to showcase those actions. We really believe that the best predictors we have of how you'll behave in the future is how you've behaved in the past. And so we're looking to understand how you've learned from, how you've responded to past experiences. And so, again, pick the topic that feels most comfortable to you, whether it's through the frame of a commitment, a community, or a challenge that you've faced, and tell us about how you've approached that thing that is important to you. I would really encourage you to, again, spend a little bit of time with these 3 prompts. Pick the one that feels like it fits the thing that you want to talk about the most. We give a little bit of guidance, a little bit of framing questions around each one of those that will encourage you to, what sorts of things that you'll want to write about here. One question that I get fairly frequently is it better to write something about something personal or professional? No right answer. I would encourage you to think about maybe covering ground that has not already been covered elsewhere in your application. So if we do give you a lot of opportunities to talk about your professional experience, it doesn't mean that you can't here. Again, I would just encourage you to think about, is there an area or an aspect of that you want to cover within this opportunity that hasn't already been covered in your other application materials? Okay, the one other thing that I'll mention here, I touched upon the reapplicant essay, is the optional information. It is truly that it is optional. It's an opportunity for if there is an aspect of your candidacy that we've asked you about in another place in your application where you feel like you haven't been able to um, fully provide the information that will help us understand it. This is a great place to put that. So, for instance, I'll give a concrete example. If you had a semester of your undergraduate experience where you had to withdraw from two classes and you had a poor grade in another one, if there's some additional context that you can give us that helps us understand what happened there, this is the place to do that. It doesn't have to be a whole essay, but just a few uh, brief statements to help us better understand that. This is your opportunity to do it. Okay. Moving along, the last sort of concrete part of the application itself that you'll fill out is the background information. And as I mentioned at the top of our time together, we are looking to understand not just your academic preparedness and your professional impact and your engagement as a community member, but your own personal circumstances that underlie all of those experiences and inform those experiences. So this section is entirely optional, but I do encourage you to engage with it and provide the information that you feel comfortable. It does help us tell that story. I'll give you as an example. We ask for information about your parents or primary caregivers, their level of education. That gives us information as to whether you are potentially a first generation college student and understanding that as part of your academic trajectory as well. So again, section is entirely optional, but I really encourage you to spend some time completing it to help complete the background story to the information that we have about you. And there is an opportunity at the bottom here. We have a number of yes or no questions. Some of them are might warrant a little bit more information, and this is an opportunity for you to provide that information. So again, we can get as full a picture of who you are and where you're coming from as possible. All right. I recognize we're coming up on time, so I'm going to touch really briefly upon the things that come after your application. So when you go to your review screen over here, you'll see for me, you have a whole lot of things that you did wrong and you need to fill out, but hopefully you'll be in good shape. And this will just serve as a final check before you submit your application. But a few things that I touched upon that do come after the application are the video question, the behavioral assessment, and in some cases, an interview. So I'll touch again quickly upon those things. Video questions are an opportunity for us to hear how you articulate yourself on your feet. If you are a non-native English speaker, it's an opportunity for us also to get a little bit of a sense of your spoken abilities. We don't have an English language testing requirement. We find that this is a great starting point for gathering that kind of information. What these are two randomized, previously recorded questions asked by a member of our admissions team. You'll have 60 seconds to deliver each of your responses. So you'll hear the question, you'll deliver a response. The best preparation you can do is just becoming familiar with the time frame, just like I should have become more familiar with the 45 minutes I had to deliver this. You should become familiar with what it takes to deliver a 60-second response that can feel like an eternity or a flash, depending on how you are accustomed to speaking. So you'll have an opportunity to do that, to practice in the platform. The number one piece of advice that I can give on the video question is do not read off of a script. Reading off of notes that you've jotted down or prepared is bad. Reading off of an AI-generated statement is even worse. I promise you that an imperfect but genuinely delivered response to a video question is going to be so much better than something that's been scripted or artificially generated in this case. We've seen so many examples of all of this, and I can promise you, your response to the video questions are not going to make or break your application, but you want to take that opportunity to enhance the application, and a genuinely delivered response is what's ultimately going to help you do that. So that's thing number one that you'll do after you hit submit. Thing number two is the behavioral assessment. And I do want to talk about this for just a moment because it is a little bit mysterious and unique to our application. I'd like to demystify it a little bit. So the behavioral assessment is an online admissions tool. It's administered by ETS. And we've worked with ETS for many, many years to develop and enhance this test. What it does is it measures a set of interpersonal and intrapersonal competencies that we know through our research are associated with success in the business school classroom. What that means is we actually use it as a supplement to your academic information. So we're not using it, it's not a personality test where we're trying to select for certain types of people in our classroom or anything like that. I guess it could be used for that. It's not how we're using it. We use it as a supplement to your testing information and your academic history. And specifically, we use it for candidates who through those two pieces of information, we may not necessarily have the same level of confidence about your academic preparation, but having this additional piece of information about your traits that are associated with what we know it takes to be successful in the classroom can only help you. So again, if you come to the table with an incredibly strong academic preparation, we're probably not weighing your behavioral assessment at all. If you're coming with a more uneven academic profile, this is actually an opportunity to give the admissions committee the confidence that just one additional piece of information that would suggest that you'll be ready to perform in our academic environment. So it's not something to be nervous about. It takes about 20 or 25 minutes to complete. You'll be presented with pairs of statements. It might be like, I like to go to meetings and I'm a very organized person. And you have to pick the one that feels more like you. You'll go through, I think it's 130 pairs of these. And I promise you, your answer to no one of these or even 50 of these is going to determine your outcome in our admissions process. So you're not meant to kind of agonize over each of these answers. Just pick the one that feels more like you. We use it, as I said, as a light touch within our application assessment process, but it can be a nice boost for those who might be coming to the table with a little bit more uneven profile if we're able to gain more confidence in your academic history through your performance on the behavioral assessment. So unlike the GMAT or the GRE, no studying required. You'll just sit down, you'll take it, you'll be done. I think it's actually a little bit fun to take. I would love to be at the point one day where we can share the results through a classroom experience. It's really best delivered through more of a sort of a engaged dynamic process with an assessor, but hopefully we'll get there one day. For now, like I said, about 20 or 25 minutes to take. All right, the final thing that I'll mention before we wrap today are interviews. So our interviews are by invitation only. We extend interview invitations throughout the entire round. And in fact, it is possible to be waitlisted without an interview and be invited to interview in a subsequent round. I know it can be really stressful waiting for an interview invitation, but as you can imagine, someone has to be the first and last file reviewed in an application cycle. And so we truly are extending invitations throughout the entire round. Try not to stress out too much if you haven't heard yet. The interview process is primarily conducted by second year students and recent alumni who served as interviews when they were students. We want to give you an opportunity to interact and engage with a peer and form a potential connection to a member of the Yale SOM community. Every once in a while, you'll be paired with a Yale SOM admission staff member. When we need to fill in, but generally speaking, I think it's a really nice opportunity to engage with another student. We provide a consistent interview experience across everyone. We want to make sure that we're not advantaging or disadvantaging based on the conversation that you have with a given student. And the same thing that I said about thinking about AI applies very much so for the interview experience as well. I know none of you would ever do this, but believe it or not, we've seen people who have had some sort of AI platform up on their screen while they're Zoom interviewing and they're typing in questions and trying to read, and I promise you it doesn't go well. Once again, this is meant to be conversational, it's meant to be dynamic, it's not meant to be perfect, it's meant to give us a chance to engage with you in an authentic way. And so bringing in a script or AI is never going to be helpful there. One last thing I'll say about the interview process, although it comes last in the sense of you've already completed all the other aspects of your application. It can feel a little bit like a gateway, like it's an up or down decision from there. I promise you, it's just one aspect of the process. As you can see, we've spent a lot of time going through all of these individual components of the application. Those still end up weighing very heavily in the final discussion of your candidacy. It's not as though the interview is the only thing that comes into play at that point. It's just one data point, but I like to point that out because I know it can feel differently from a candidate's point of view. So and I know we've gone a little bit over time, but hopefully that was a useful dive into some of the more detailed technical parts of our application and help connect it back to the three things that we're really looking to understand about you: your academic readiness, your professional impact and potential, and your engagement as a community member, all with the foundation of who you are, what your background is, and how you've achieved the things that you've achieved to date. And so with that, I will just call out, we do have a couple of additional opportunity, or actually quite a few additional opportunities to hear from us about our application process and the school in the coming months. So I believe starting next month, we have application workshops happening by region, often in a time that is convenient for your region of the world. So be on the lookout for those. We host admissions Q&As regularly, pretty much every week. August 13th is another, I think, really helpful event called Our Best App Advice. It'll be myself along with my co-assistant, Dean, and probably frequent face in your inbox, Bruce Delmonico. And we'll be talking about just that, some of the best advice that we can give based on questions that we frequently get about the application process and how we're looking at things. So encourage you to check that out as well. We have live events going on throughout the world. If you happen to be in Tokyo, Seoul, or Taipei, I may have a chance to see you in over the next 2 weeks. We have other members of our team throughout the world who are excited to meet you in person if you're in a place where we're going to be. As I mentioned before, the online application guide is a great resource as you're going through the application as well. And then you can always reach out to us at mba.admissions@yale.edu with any specific questions that you have about your application. So thank you so much for being here today. Thank you so much to Jen and Modesta, who are here with me and from our team, and who will be answering many of the questions that you have coming through our MBA inbox as well. I hope you found this helpful, and I look forward to getting a chance to review many of your applications with our team in the coming months. So thank you on behalf of all of us.